There was a point in time in Tony Hawk gaming history where the games are becoming less about skateboarding and more about destroying your environments or being close to simulation. As the games are being churned out, more and more features are being added to the game to feel fresh and exciting. New ways to play the game, but not a lot of people would actually use these features in their gameplay. It even got to a point where we got 2 games that made you use a literal skateboard to play the game. Dark times. These games were not what the Tony Hawk games were known for. The flow and structure of the original Pro Skaters were unmatched. There was no need to add anything else. Fans wanted to return to form. A game that didn't need a peripheral for you to play on, that didn't have unnecessary features, that wasn't an MTV episode. Well, ask and you shall receive. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater HD would promise to be the game everybody was waiting for. This game would be going back to the first 2 games in the series with updated visuals, but came with 2 conditions. The first is that the game would be based on the first 2 games and would play like it too, meaning no reverts, spine transfers, or getting off your board. And second, it would be developed by Robomoto, who already worked on Tony Hawk Ride and Shred, aka Tony Hawk Pee Pee and Poo Poo. But it was still fine. A lot of people liked the simplicity of the earlier games, so it was looking like Activision learned their lesson not to add any more gimmicks for the series. This game came out in 2012, initially on the Xbox Live Arcade, then the PlayStation Network Store a month later, and eventually on PC a few months after that. All of which are now delisted, so there's no way to even obtain them without sailing the high seas. When you start the game, you're met with a bunch of stationary splash screens as your introduction. That means no opening cinematic, one of the most memorable parts of the game. And even when you press start, the main menu is just so empty. There's nothing here other than single player, online, and options. Starting the game with single player, we can scroll through the playable skaters. Oh no. Your skaters here are a mix of 4 classic skaters, 4 new skaters, and 2 contest winners. And additionally, Xbox owners were able to play as their own avatar, which was pretty neat. And of course, I always have to go with the Hawkman when I'm explaining these games. Riley Hawk, that is. Jokes aside, he's actually a good skater. Then we get to select our main modes. The classic career mode, single session, and free skate. We also have a small mix of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 levels. Possibly the best levels that people like the most. But let's play through the career and get a look at how HD these levels really are. So let me say this, the game's levels do look good for its time. Up until this game, we never got a truly upscaled version of the original levels. Now yes, you have Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2X with the better textures and lighting that makes the levels look elevated, or remastered if you will. But looking at these levels, it's a step up, and it looked visually stunning at the time. Everything looks like it was made from the ground up. Even in Venice Beach, the whole level takes place during a sunset that brings it all together. And it was good enough to have the same scenery in the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake. As for all the compliments I could give this game, that's all I got. At first glance, the game looks high-res and elevated. That is until you start moving. When you actually start pressing buttons, everything starts to go wrong. Navigating around the level and slowing down feels delayed, like your D-pad has some weight to it. Ollieing off vert ramps propels you straight to the ceiling. Flip tricks look unnatural, like you have a super fast flick and a slow catch. Grinding doesn't snap you onto the rail, but instead slowly magnetizes you onto the railing and clips through any solid objects that can lead to unintentional bails. It's difficult to tell when you're going to land safely or if the game just all of a sudden decides when you're gonna bail. Anytime you bump a wall or switch your stance, there's a small delay before you can jump again. Wall riding in general is very buggy and can result in bails like this. And when you bail, your skater ragdolls and defies gravity. It's not really an issue per se, but it kinda shows what the whole game is like. The game tries its best to play like the originals, but it still feels too slow and floaty, like you're playing Tony Hawk Ride and Shred, also known as Tony Hawk Kaka and Wee Wiz. I mean, this game was made by the same developers, so they probably used the same engine, which was not an ideal choice. All of that feels even worse once you bump up the stats to its max. Now it feels like you have moon gravity every time you ollie and become uncontrollable at high speeds. It's hard to even slow down to get your bearings. Also, out of topic a little, but the bumpers don't do anything and you can't rebind controls. They're usually there for spinning, but the triggers are used for that instead, making it feel like you're playing on a Dreamcast controller. I mean, if you wanted to make the game feel super old, then yeah, they nailed it. The level choices themselves are strange. 3 levels from the first game and 4 levels from the second game. You got Warehouse, of course, and both of the downhill levels from the first game. And there's nothing wrong with the downhill levels, but there's definitely some sections in those levels that aren't made properly. Some ramps aren't connected and it completely cuts you off. Riding to the bottom will teleport you, but it won't teleport you if you're in a combo. And remember getting to that secret tape in Downhill Jam being a pain? There was this whole line you had to follow and you couldn't lose your speed or else you couldn't make the gaps. Well, now you could just ride up the mountain. Definitely not made too well. Then for the second game, we have School 2, Hangar, Venice Beach, and Marseille. Even though Marseille isn't a competition level and has its own set of goals, making the game have 7 levels in total. That's less than the total amount of levels in the first Tony Hawk game. And speaking of the goals, they all match the originals while adding some new ones in levels that needed them. There's even a map view for every level that shows the location of all the collectibles, which is helpful for some people that have trouble finding things. The goals also display on the top right of your screen so you can keep track of the different goals without having to pause the game. You can also restart your run without pausing the game by pressing the select button. The song choices are also strange. It also mixes songs from the old games with some new ones, but most of the classic songs are from Pro Skater 2, and the only song from Pro Skater 1 is Superman. When you do complete the career mode, the only thing you get is your character's second outfit. No skate video from your skater, all you get is an outfit that should have already been unlocked by default. But you also unlock a new game mode called Projectives, which gives every level a set of new goals that are much harder than the career modes. So just 5 different goals, but now you get 1 minute to complete them. The time restriction alone makes things a lot harder, and collecting any of the skateboards or bonusing the magic bums will take you the full minute. Then there's 2 other modes that you unlock as you continue playing through career mode. There's Hawkman, which is the same game mode used in Proving Ground. This mode places pellets in a section of the map that you have to trick on in order to collect them. But that's easier said than done because of how close together these pellets can be and how slow you turn. The game's engine just makes it tough to complete these challenges. Then the other game mode is Big Head Survival. Here your head continuously grows to a comedic size until it eventually explodes. Your goal is to survive as long as you can and continually score points to reset your head back to normal. Honestly a cool idea, but it's a lot funnier to just watch your head explode. The game gives you additional skaters if you complete these modes, and it can be fun to play as them, especially when you have to play as a pixelated Tony Hawk and have to wait for his textures to load in. But I do like how there's cheats, something that newer games lack. You can be invisible, turn on slow-mo, or have big head mode permanently on. But your big head also has collisions, so for some reason the game acts weird when you use it. But that's all you really get with this game. There's no local multiplayer, no create a park, no create a skater, no unlockable for completing all gaps, nothing else that made the original game fun. But hey, at least you could connect your game to Facebook and share your scores to all your family members that won't care about it. Playing this game is just a true pain in the butt. It feels like you're playing a worse version of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, with terrible movement and the lack of features that were in the other games. But here's the kicker. No, not that kicker. The game did have a revert function pre-baked in the game's files. It was just an on and off toggle that could have been added from the start. So this game could have been entirely different. People found out about it and didn't like it at all, so the revert was later added with a free update. And with that update came with a DLC pack called the Revert Pack. With this, you not only get the ability to revert, but also get 3 additional levels from Pro Skater 3 and 4 additional skaters, 2 of them being classic characters, and 2 of them being members from Metallica with some of their songs being added as well. The levels do look good and had their own career mode goals with them, but oh my god, they were not made for this engine. You just move way too slow and everything you do is floaty, it feels unnatural. And the revert itself is too tight and doesn't work half the time. If you want to revert, you can press the right trigger when you land on a vert ramp, but you have to press it as soon as you can. If you're even a millisecond too late, then the revert won't register. But conversely, if you land on a vert ramp, then you can ride around as long as you want without ollieing or airing off a ledge. And then revert at any time and the combo will start there. You also can't ollie out of reverts and almost always have to follow it up with a manual. But the worst thing is, there's no penalty for using the revert. You don't slow down after doing it multiple times, so you can keep on spamming it until you lose your manual balance. It also somehow doesn't calculate your score properly and you can get over 10 million points in a combo, which just shows how lazy this game is. And I'm not just talking about the gameplay. All of the new skaters are just copies of some of the old skaters that didn't make it in this game. Nyjah Huston copies Alyssa Steamer's moveset, Chris Cole's moveset copies Kareem Campbell's moveset, even Riley Hawk copies Chad Muska's moveset. And you can tell because he keeps the Muska nose manual. I don't want to talk about this game anymore. Although Tony Hawk's Pro Skater HD was a step in the right direction, going back to classic controls and having the fast, addictive gameplay everybody knew, it was a huge disappointment and does not feel like the beloved remake that fans were hoping for. The game definitely looks HD, but the rest of the game's title, you know, the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater part, doesn't fall through. At the time, the levels looked the best it ever did, but the game itself was just terrible to play. This game tries its best to mimic the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 engine so hard, but ends up being just as slow and floaty like the other Robomoto games. The game felt incomplete with so many missing features from the original games, and anything new that was added felt rushed. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater HD was just a poorly made game, and it's thanks to this game, and another one that doesn't deserve to be mentioned, that fans of the series have become super critical of what a Tony Hawk game should feel like, how it should play, what features it should have. The series was widely respected not just because of its name and what it did to put skateboarding on everybody's radar, but because of how it played and how good it felt. People kept coming back to that. In fact, Tony Hawk wanted this game to be a best-of collection with the first few games just because of how loved and respected they were. And although this game failed to be that, there was another game that was made years later that would learn from every mistake this game made. All of the levels looked incredible, the game was snappy and responsive like the originals, and there was a lot of replayability with the new features that were added. This game instead was the game that Tony Hawk wanted all along, but it would still be a remake for the first two games. The next two games were never remade in the same way. I mean, the levels in this DLC pack looked really good, but these three levels are the only levels from Pro Skater 3 that got the HD treatment. Imagine if all the other levels from Pro Skater 3 were given the opportunity to shine under a new light. And especially with Pro Skater 4, most of those levels are locked behind the 6th generation of consoles and never got a visual uplift like the first two games. And who knows if the 4th Pro Skater would even be remade at all because of how different it was from the others. The first two Pro Skaters have been re-released and given a new coat of paint numerous times. We may never get to know if Pro Skater 3 or 4 will receive the love it deserves. Oh, wait a minute.